Hey everybody, Aaron Olson here, coming to you from the studio at the Raven Golf Club in Phoenix at the Tour Striker Golf Academy. I hope you've enjoyed all of our videos so far on the basically. Hey everybody, Aaron Olson here, coming to you from the Raven Golf Club Phoenix. I'm at the back of the range at the studio here at the Tour Striker Golf Academy. And today we're going to go over a few things regarding the tilts in the backswing. So if you haven't seen that first video using gears, I recommend you check it out. And if you haven't seen any of the previous videos on this backswing series, go ahead and check those out. It'll give you some background and it'll tie in with this one very nicely. So I have two camera views today, which is kind of cool. And then I can also record some things and stop and start, so it'll give you a different look at what we're doing here. Most of the original videos that we talked about had to deal with the turning pieces. So we started with the hips and shoulders, then I added the knees, and now we're on to the tilts. So if you watch that first video, what you probably gathered from it is that golf isn't played straight up and down where we just turn. So if I played up on a plane like this, I could just go back and forth and turn on a straight line. I wouldn't have to do any of this tilting. So by just the mere fact that we bend over to the golf ball, it starts to put in the necessity for a side bend or a lateral flexion, if you want to call it that, or a tilt. So once again, if I'm over this golf ball, and I go straight up and down like this, and I make a turn back. I could turn to 90 degrees with my shoulders, 45 with my hips. Notice my knees didn't do any flexing really. They just are kind of moving around as my hip sockets move. So as my hips move, my knees are following to the extent that they can. And then my shoulders are turned 90, and you can see, like, from this back camera view here, I have a very, very vertical, placard on my shirt where my buttons are. It didn't side bend one way or the other. We obviously know golf isn't played that way, so the backswing series here is diving more in depth as to what actually happens versus just talking about the turning pieces. So as I go back in a backswing, and you'll see from this face-on view, if I had a piece of tape, I could actually tape my shirt straight up the middle here. And actually, why don't I do that? I can do that really quickly. Use a nice bright pink. So if I put this straight up and down, kind of tuck it into my belt buckle here, you're going to see a couple things as I set up to the ball. Number one, this piece of tape isn't going to be completely straight up and down. As a right-handed golfer here into this golf ball, I've got a slight bit of tilt to the right with my spine. So as I go here, I'm tilted away from the target. And if you watch that first video, I think it was, depending on the player, depending on the club, that tilt varies. But unless you're putting or hitting a little chip shot, the shoulders aren't super level at address. There's like 8 to 10 degrees, as we go up to the driver of a rightward side tilt. So as I push my hips and my pressure onto my front foot just slightly at address, that usually puts just enough of a tilt to the right in my spine at address. Also, the fact that I think my right arm sits lower, my right hand sits lower on the grip than my left, starts to add this tilt as well. So at address, I've got a little curvature of this piece of tape here to the right. Now, if I kept that same tilt or that rightward tilt and I made a backswing and I tried to turn 90 degrees, it's almost hard to do. Turning 90, you can see from this view how I'm pretty vertical with that piece of tape, and I'm actually tilted to the right with it. So as I did that, if I didn't do any leftward tilt, you can see what that looks like from this face-on view. Obviously, we don't have, even if I let my hips turn and did that, we don't have any golfers who look like this at the top, with their left shoulder higher than their right, okay? So there's something else going on. Now, we talked about address, so we've got, let's say, 8 to 10 degrees of tilt to the right at address. As I go back and I make a pretty decent looking backswing. And, you know, depending on where my pressure is, it doesn't really matter when I'm doing it slowly like this. So you'll notice that, excuse me, this tape is starting to tilt towards the ground here, this pink piece of tape down my chest. So as I turn my chest 90 degrees to this camera behind me, I've got some bend to this piece of tape. And you know there's those Nike golf shirts that Tiger wears. They have the stripe like this, but they have it up the back. You can also see it from the back view pretty well if you've ever seen a picture of him with a shirt like that. So I've got this left tilt. So this varies, but you know, for the most part, I'm taking it from 10 degrees of right tilt to roughly 35, 40 even of left up at the top of the swing. So I'm going from this direction, slightly to the right, to like 40 to the left. So let's say that was 40, somewhere like that. So that's a change of 50 degrees when I go back and forth and look at this. So that's what's happening in the backswing. Now, why is it important? Well, you saw as I did my first one, and I tried to not tilt at all, keep my shoulders really level, my head goes from this position where I can see the ball, and it pulls up like this, and I literally can't see the golf ball without adding this left tilt. Second thing it does is it changes my incline to the ground. So if I go up like this, and I keep my shoulders too level, my left shoulder starts riding up high, and my head actually pulls up and away from the golf ball from this down the line view. So if I was a golfer who did that, and I do have some golfers who do a little bit of this, they go up and away from the golf ball, and then they have to really overdo the almost adding left tilt too much in the transition to get themselves back into this incline to the ground. So when I say incline, I don't mean spine angle. I mean the relative angle of my torso and hips to the ground, because as you're learning here in these backswing videos, the spine angle changes. It changes from a right tilt to a left tilt. It also changes from what we would call square to turning. Almost everybody knows that piece. And then the last piece that we have to start talking about here is the extension, and that'll be in the next video of the Build a Better Backswing series. So, you know, the gist of this is that as I go back, I need some left tilt to keep my vision on the golf ball, to keep my inclination on the golf ball. And also, as I left tilt and turn, I think the left tilting actually helps me turn my body to the right. So as I turn my torso and hips to the right, my tilt goes down to the left or towards the ball. Now the same can be said for the knees. So the measurements on the knees vary from player to player, but as I start, I've got a certain amount of knee flex in both legs. Let's say it's 25 degrees. As I go to the top, my right leg gets a little bit straighter. So let's say I lose 5 degrees of flex in that one. So now I'm at 20 or 18, something like that. And as I go to the top, my left leg gains quite a bit of flex. This can gain up to almost 20 degrees of flex in some cases. So as this one flexes and this one straightens, that puts a little bit of tilt or angle to my knees. So my left kneecap is now a little lower than my right. As I do that, that starts to tilt the middle section of my body here. So in the gears video, you probably saw slightly, well, basically level hips. So let's say 0 tilt to my belt at address. And then as I go back, I'm adding, let's say, 10 degrees of left tilt to this pelvis hip region. So I go from 0 to 10 with the hips. So my hips are pointed at the ground more than they were. They're left tilted, which helps me keep pointing them to the ground as I turn. And then also my shoulders tilting 40 degrees, a change of roughly 45 to 50 to get myself in the backswing position. So if you're struggling with this, a good way to do it is you can just simply put your head up against a wall. So I'm going to be out of frame in one of the videos here, but if I put my head up in this door frame here and I make a backswing, I'll do it left-handed, and I keep my head relatively just touching this wall corner, I now have some tilt. You can see how my spine or this pink piece of tape tilted towards the wall. And as I do that, that's what keeps my incline to the ground very, very steady. So that's a good way to do it, just practicing it that way. If you do it too quickly, let's say you actually tilted faster than you turned, your head would actually probably go forward. So if I only tilted in the backswing and I didn't turn, my head would go towards the target. So if you're a golfer who tends to get their head going down and towards the target too quickly in the backswing, doesn't mean that you're tilting too much per se, but it means you're doing it faster than you're doing your turning pieces to start with. So I would then look at that turning video if you see that and make sure your shoulders are turning at a fast enough rate and getting to this kind of 90-degree mark as a benchmark. Okay, so there's some different variables here that control the torso as you go to the top of the swing, but this is one that I think has been overlooked over the years. Obviously, Andy Plummer and Mike Bennett from Stack and Tilt, the tilt is right in the name of, you know, what they talked about with their swing pattern, but it's an essential part of playing golf on a bent over angle or playing golf on a tilted angle. So without it, the game of golf really doesn't exist in my mind. So they've done a lot in opening up eyes to that. And then we also have all the 3D data to back it up these days. So if you have any questions, leave them down below. Next video is going to be how the extension pieces fit into this. And I think that'll about cover the big body pieces in this Build a Better Backswing series. So once again, thanks for watching. Leave your comments and questions below, and we'll talk to you soon.